Twins see an injured millionaire protecting a baby from a snake, then they do this. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're seeing me from. I really want to know if you liked my story and I want to get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The desperate scream cut through the warm afternoon air of Aspen, Colorado, like a sharp blade. Allison Smith stopped abruptly in the middle of the John Denver sanctuary, her heart racing as she heard the agonizing sound coming from the direction of the lake. At 28, she had worked as a nanny for nearly a decade, but she had never heard a cry as desperate as that one. "Brittany," she yelled to her twin sister, who was playing with the children under their care near the playground. "Did you hear that?" Brittany Smith looked up, her identical eyes reflecting the same concern as her sister's. The two twins had been inseparable for as long as they could remember, raised in a local orphanage after being abandoned as infants. They always worked together, caring for children from wealthy families in the city, and had developed a sharp, protective instinct that made them react immediately to any sign of a child in danger. The cry started again, louder and more desperate this time. It was the cry of a very young baby, mixed with the pained groans of an adult. Allison dropped her bag on the ground and ran towards the sound, closely followed by Brittany, who had left the children with a mother she knew at the park. As they rounded a row of towering aspen trees bordering the lake, they found a scene that would be forever etched in their memories. A middle-aged man, dressed in an expensive suit now torn and caked with dirt, was lying on the ground near the bushes, clutching a baby to his chest. His right leg was bleeding profusely, and a few feet away, a rattlesnake was slowly slithering away into the dry leaves. "Oh my God!" Brittany exclaimed, rushing to help. The man looked at them with eyes full of both pain and relief. "Please," he murmured in a weak voice. "Help the baby. I can't stand up anymore." Allison knelt beside him, quickly assessing the situation. The man was Walter Nicholson. She recognized his face from the local paper as the owner of Nicholson Medical Equipment, one of the most prosperous companies in the region. But at that moment, he was just a wounded and frightened human being, protecting a child who was clearly not his. "What happened?" Allison asked, carefully taking the baby from Walter's arms. The boy was at most 4 months old, dressed in simple, clean clothes, but crying with the intensity of someone who had been through a terrible scare. "I found him here," Walter said, trying to sit up as Brittany examined his wound. "He was in a wicker basket, hidden behind those bushes. When I got closer to see if he was okay, the snake appeared out of nowhere. I jumped in front of the child and—" He groaned in pain as Brittany gently touched the area of the bite. The venom was already taking effect, and the skin around the bite was beginning to swell and darken. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately," Brittany said urgently, pulling her cell phone from her pocket, "and the baby needs to be examined too." While Brittany called 911, Allison cradled the little one in her arms, trying to calm him. There was something about the way the baby snuggled against her that awakened a maternal instinct she didn't even know she possessed. The boy had large, dark eyes, still sparse brown hair, and a shy smile that appeared as soon as he felt safe. "What's your name, little one?" she whispered. Checking the child's clothes for any identification, she found only a small, crumpled piece of paper in the diaper's pocket with a single word written by hand. "Anthony." "The ambulance is on its way," Brittany announced, returning to their side. "Mr. Nicholson, try to stay calm. We'll take care of both you and the baby." Walter looked at Allison holding Anthony, and something in his expression softened despite the pain. "You are angels," he murmured. "You appeared when we needed you most." The next few minutes passed in a blur. The ambulance arrived quickly, and the paramedics worked efficiently to stabilize Walter before transporting him. Allison refused to let go of Anthony, insisting on accompanying them to the hospital, while Brittany followed in her own car, after making sure the other children were safe with their guardians. At Aspen Valley Hospital, chaos filled the hallways. Walter was immediately taken to intensive care to receive anti-venom, while Allison remained in the waiting room with Anthony, who had stopped crying and was now observing everything around him with childlike curiosity. "Are you relatives of the child?" asked a social worker who appeared about an hour later. "No," replied Brittany, who had arrived shortly after them. "We found him abandoned in the park. Mr. Nicholson tried to protect him and was bitten by a snake." The social worker, a serious middle-aged woman named Frances Carter, took careful notes. "We'll need to contact Child Protective Services. Cases of abandonment need to be investigated." "Can I stay with him tonight?" Allison asked impulsively. "Until you resolve the situation. He's gotten used to me, and I have experience with babies." Frances hesitated, studying the two sisters. There was something genuine in their concern, a natural kindness she had learned to recognize in her years of work. "For tonight, yes. But tomorrow morning, we need to talk about the next steps." 3 hours later, a doctor came out of the surgical center with news about Walter. "He's going to be fine," announced Dr. Richard Miles. "We managed to neutralize the venom in time, but he'll need to stay in the hospital for a few days for observation." "Can he have visitors?" Brittany asked. "Tomorrow morning, perhaps. He needs to rest now." The sisters returned to the small apartment they shared in downtown Aspen, carrying Anthony and a bag of baby supplies they had bought on the way. The night was long and full of discoveries. Anthony was a surprisingly calm baby who slept well and smiled easily, but there were moments when he would stare into space with a heart-wrenching expression of sadness. "Who could have done this to him?" Brittany whispered as they watched the baby sleep in the makeshift crib they had assembled with pillows and blankets. "I don't know," Allison replied, gently running her fingers through Anthony's hair. "But I swear that as long as he's with us, he won't lack for love." It was a promise she made from the heart, not knowing that that night marked the beginning of a journey that would change not only their lives, but also that of an injured businessman who had risked his own safety to protect an unknown child. In the silence of the Aspen dawn, as Anthony slept peacefully between two women who had chosen to love him without question, fate was already weaving paths none of them could imagine. The morning brought new worries when Frances Carter called early, her voice filled with urgency. "I need you to come to the hospital immediately," she said. "There are complications with the baby's case, and Mr. Nicholson is asking to speak with you." The hospital corridor was busier than the previous night when Allison and Brittany arrived with Anthony in their arms. Frances Carter was waiting for them near the reception, her grave expression revealing that the news would not be good. "What happened?" Brittany asked immediately, adjusting the diaper bag on her shoulder. "We found something concerning during the baby's routine exams," Frances said, guiding them to a private room. "Anthony has a rare heart condition called tetralogy of Fallot. It's serious, but treatable with surgery." Allison felt the world spin. She had only spent one night caring for that child, but she already felt deeply connected to him. "How serious is it?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Without surgery, he might not survive more than a few months. With the right procedure, he can lead a normal life," explained Dr. Richard Miles, who had joined them. "The problem is that the surgery costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the waiting list for state-funded procedures can take over a year." "A year he doesn't have," Brittany murmured, watching Anthony, who was innocently playing with his own fingers, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "There's something else," Frances continued. "Mr. Walter Nicholson insists on speaking with you. He said he has a proposal to make." The sisters exchanged glances. They only knew Walter from the few hours the night before, but there was something in the way he had protected Anthony that suggested a man of good character. In room 312, they found Walter sitting up in the hospital bed, his casted leg elevated, but his eyes alert and determined. When he saw Anthony, his face lit up with a genuine smile. "How's the little warrior?" he asked, extending his arms toward the baby. Allison hesitated for a moment before handing Anthony to him. It was surprising to see how the baby calmed down in Walter's presence, as if he recognized the man who had risked his life to protect him. "I heard about his condition," Walter said, his voice turning more serious, "and I want to help." "Mr. Nicholson, that's very generous of you, but—" Brittany began. "It's not generosity," he interrupted. "It's responsibility. When I found this boy abandoned and decided to protect him, I made a commitment. I can't just walk away knowing he needs help." Allison studied the businessman's face. There was something in his eyes, a deep sadness that went beyond the previous day's accident. "Why would you do this for a child you don't even know?" Walter was silent for a long moment, looking at Anthony, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "5 years ago, I lost the chance to be a father. My wife Catherine and I tried for years, but she lost 2 babies early in her pregnancies. After that, she closed her heart to the possibility of having children. Maybe this is fate giving me a second chance." The sincerity in his voice was unquestionable. Francis, who had remained silent, spoke up. "Mr. Nicholson, what exactly are you proposing?" "I want to pay for Anthony's surgery, and more than that, I want to help in any way necessary until a suitable family is found to adopt him." Allison felt tears welling up in her eyes. This is unbelievable. We barely know you, and you're willing to do so much." "You barely knew me, and you rescued me yesterday," he replied with a smile. "Sometimes life puts us in situations where we have to act with our hearts, not our heads." Francis made notes on her clipboard. "I'll need proper documentation and approval from my superiors, but in principle, this can be arranged. The important thing is that Anthony gets the treatment he needs." In the following 2 weeks, a strange but comforting routine was established. Walter was discharged from the hospital, but continued to visit Anthony daily, who remained hospitalized for pre-operative monitoring. Allison and Brittany took turns between their nannying jobs and caring for the baby, creating an ever stronger bond with the child. "You know you can't get too attached," Francis warned during one of her visits. "Anthony will eventually be placed for adoption with a permanent family." But it was too late for that advice. Allison was already dreaming of Anthony at night, and Brittany had started buying clothes and toys for him with her own money. Walter also showed clear signs of paternal attachment, arriving at the hospital even before the morning shift nurses started. It was during one of these mornings that the first real complication arose. Walter was feeding Anthony when an elegant woman of about 45 stormed into the room like a tempest. "So this is where you've been spending your mornings," said Catherine Nicholson, her voice laced with bitterness and pain. She was a beautiful woman with impeccably styled blonde hair and expensive clothes, but her eyes reflected years of accumulated hurt. "Catherine," Walter said, getting up carefully, "I didn't know you were coming." "Of course you didn't. You've been so busy playing dad that you forgot to tell me about your new hobbies." Allison and Brittany glanced at each other uncomfortably, realizing they were witnessing an intimate marital dispute. "Maybe we should leave," Brittany murmured. "No," Catherine said firmly. "I want you to stay. I want you to hear what I have to say." She approached Walter, who was still holding Anthony. "Do you really think you can replace the children we lost with this abandoned child? Do you think this will heal the pain of the babies I could never give you?" "Catherine, it's not about replacement," Walter said gently. "It's about giving a chance to a child who needs it." "No!" she shouted, her emotions finally overflowing. "I can't watch you get attached to another baby. I can't go through the pain of losing him again if something goes wrong." Anthony started to cry at the raised voices. Alison instinctively moved to take the baby, but Catherine blocked her. "And you too," she said, looking at the sisters with hostility. "Do you think you can play happy family with my husband? Do you think I don't know he's getting too emotionally involved?" "Mrs. Nicholson," Alison said calmly, "we only want what's best for Anthony. There's no ulterior motive." "Isn't there?" Catherine asked sarcastically. "An orphan child, a rich man willing to pay for everything, two young women who showed up at the right time. How convenient." The silence that followed was tense and painful. Walter looked at his wife with an expression of deep disappointment. "If that's how you think of me, of us, then maybe we should discuss this at home," he said. "No," Catherine replied, her voice now lower but equally hurt. "I think we don't have much to discuss anymore. You've made your choice, Walter. You chose an unknown child and two strangers over your own wife." She turned and left the room, leaving a heavy silence behind her. Walter sat down heavily in the armchair, still holding Anthony, who had stopped crying and was now looking at him with his big, trusting eyes. "Mr. Nicholson," Brittany said softly, "maybe we should reconsider. We don't want to cause problems in your marriage." "The marriage already had problems long before Anthony showed up," he said sadly. "Catherine and I have been living like strangers for years, but that doesn't change what this boy needs." Alison came closer and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Are you sure you want to continue? This could complicate your life a lot." Walter looked at Anthony, who had started smiling again and was playing with the buttons on his shirt. "Look at him. How can I abandon a child who needs me? How can I live with myself knowing I had the chance to save him and gave up for convenience?" That night, Walter returned home to find half of Catherine's clothes gone from the closet. A letter lay on the bed with just a few lines. "I can't compete with ghosts of the past or impossible dreams. When you decide to come back to reality, call me. Until then, I'll be at my sister's." Anthony's surgery was scheduled for the following week, but now the situation had become complicated in ways no one had foreseen. The week before, Anthony's surgery passed like a silent nightmare. Walter arrived at the hospital every morning with dark circles under his eyes and rumpled clothes, clear signs that he was sleeping poorly. Catherine had shown no signs of life since leaving the house, and the silence in his mansion in Aspen's West End had become deafening. "You need to eat something," Alison insisted, offering a sandwich she had brought from home. "Anthony needs you to be strong for him." Walter looked at the baby sleeping peacefully in his hospital crib, connected to monitors that constantly measured his heart rate. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing," he murmured. "Maybe Catherine is right. Maybe I'm being selfish, trying to fill a void with a child who deserves something better." "Don't say that," Brittany said firmly, sitting beside him. "You saved his life. Without your help, Anthony wouldn't even be alive today." It was true, but guilt continued to eat away at Walter. His company had begun to suffer from his constant absences, and rumors of his separation from Catherine were already circulating in the city's social circles. But every time he looked at Anthony, who had grown noticeably even in the past few weeks, and now recognized his face with spontaneous smiles, he knew he couldn't abandon him. On the morning of the surgery, an unexpected discovery shook the already fragile situation even more. Dr. Richard Miles called Walter and the sisters for a private conversation before the procedure. "There's something you need to know," the doctor said, consulting a folder full of documents. "During the preparations for the surgery, we ran comprehensive genetic tests on Anthony to identify any potential complications. We found something interesting." Alison felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of something?" "Anthony has rare genetic markers that suggest a very specific family heritage. Based on the results, we were able to trace potential relatives through the National DNA Database." Walter stood up abruptly. You found his family. We found a partial match, Dr. Miles confirmed. A woman named Florence Myers, 52 years old, registered her DNA in the database about 3 years ago looking for lost relatives. She could be Anthony's grandmother or great-grandmother. The silence that followed was heavy. For weeks, everyone had grown accustomed to the idea that Anthony was truly an orphan, an abandoned child with no known family. The possibility that he might have living relatives changed everything. "Where does she live?" Brittany asked in a small voice. "Right here in Aspen. She's worked as a housekeeper for decades. We've already contacted her, and she's coming here this afternoon." Anthony's surgery lasted 4 agonizing hours. Walter, Allison, and Brittany remained in the waiting room, each lost in their own thoughts and fears. The possibility of losing the baby during the procedure was now mixed with the uncertainty of what would happen if he survived and his biological family claimed him. "Dr. Miles!" Allison called out when the doctor finally appeared, still in his surgical gown. "The surgery was a complete success," he announced with a tired smile. "Anthony will need a few weeks to recover, but his heart now works perfectly. He will have a normal life." The relief was so intense that Walter had to sit down. Allison and Brittany hugged, tears of joy streaming down their faces. But the joy was interrupted when Dr. Miles continued. "Mrs. Myers has arrived. She's waiting to meet you." Florence Myers was a small, thin woman with grey hair, tied in a simple bun and hands calloused from domestic work. Her eyes, however, shone with a sharp intelligence and a natural kindness that was evident from the first moment. "So, you're the angels who took care of my grandson," she said, looking at each of them with genuine gratitude. "Mrs. Myers," Walter said, "we're not yet sure if Anthony is really your grandson." "I don't need a DNA test to know," she replied with conviction. "When I saw the picture the doctor showed me, I recognized him immediately. He looks just like my son Charles when he was a baby." Allison's heart sank. "Your son, Anthony's father?" Florence sighed deeply. "Charles passed away 6 years ago in a work accident. He was a construction worker. His girlfriend Marcia was pregnant at the time, but she was very young, only 18. After Charles was gone, she disappeared. Her family never liked him, thought he wasn't good enough for her." "And you never heard from Marcia or the baby again?" Brittany asked. "I searched for years," Florence said, her hands trembling slightly. "I put ads in the papers, searched in churches, registered my DNA, hoping to one day find him. Marcia must have had the baby, and then... I don't know what happened to her to leave my grandson abandoned like that." Walter watched the woman carefully. There was sincerity in every word, but also a fragility that worried him. "Mrs. Myers, are you in a position to raise a child? Anthony will need special care for the next few months. Mr. Nicholson," she said, looking directly into his eyes, "I know you paid for my grandson's surgery. I know you all cared for him as if he were your own. I'm not a rich woman, but I have a lot of love to give." "That's not in question," Allison said gently, "but raising a child is expensive, and Anthony will need regular medical checkups, medication." Florence lowered her head. "I earn minimum wage working for 3 different families. I live in a small rented room in a modest neighborhood. I know I can't give him everything you can, but he's my blood. He's all I have left of my Charles." The dilemma was agonizing. Legally, Florence had more rights to Anthony than any of them. Morally, the situation was too complex for a simple answer. "May I make a suggestion?" said Dr. Miles, who had been listening to the conversation in silence. "Anthony will need to stay in the hospital for another 2 weeks. Why don't we use this time for everyone to get to know each other better and perhaps find a solution that works for everyone?" Thus began a strange and delicate period of forced coexistence. Florence spent her mornings at the hospital with Anthony, while Allison and Brittany took turns in the afternoons, and Walter took over the nights. It was impossible not to notice how Anthony reacted differently to each of them. With Florence, he was calm but reserved, as if sensing the woman's tension and uncertainty. With the sisters, he relaxed completely, laughing and playing in the natural way of a secure and loved baby. With Walter, there was a special connection that no one could explain. The baby simply became completely calm in his arms, as if recognizing the man who had risked his life to protect him. A week after the surgery, Florence made a confession that changed everything again. "I was lying to you," she said during a late-night conversation in the waiting room. "Not about being Anthony's grandmother, that's true, but about being able to raise him." Walter, Alison and Brittany looked at her in silence, waiting for her to continue. "I have diabetes and high blood pressure. At 52, I work 3 jobs just to pay rent and my medication. I don't have the energy or resources to raise a baby who will need special care." "Then why didn't you say so from the beginning?" Brittany asked. "Because I thought it was my duty," Florence replied, tears streaming down her face. "He's all I have left of my son. I thought somehow I could manage." "And now?" Alison asked softly. Florence looked through the room's window at the crib, where Anthony slept peacefully. "Now I know that loving someone sometimes means letting them go. You can give him everything I can't, but—" She paused, her voice failing. "But," Walter encouraged, "can I still be his grandmother? I don't want to disappear from his life completely." Walter's response to Florence's question surprised everyone, including himself. "Of course you can still be his grandmother. Anthony needs to know his origins, his real family." In the following days, as Anthony recovered quickly from surgery, an unconventional family dynamic began to form. Florence visited every morning before work, telling stories about Charles and showing old photos she had religiously kept. Alison and Brittany maintained their care shifts, and Walter. Walter was living the fatherhood experience he had always dreamed of. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Alison made a disturbing discovery. She was organizing Anthony's medical papers when she noticed something strange in Florence's documents. "Brittany," she called, showing her a piece of paper. "Look at this. Florence's maiden name is Smith." Brittany looked at the document, not understanding its significance. "So, Smith is our last name too, and she's 52, the right age to have had daughters around the time we were abandoned." The silence that followed was charged with terrifying and exciting possibilities. The sisters had always dreamed of finding their origins, but they never imagined it could happen so unexpectedly. "Do you think—" Brittany began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know what to think," Alison replied, "but we need to find out." When Florence arrived the next morning, the sisters were waiting for her with a serious expression that immediately worried her. "Did something happen to Anthony?" she asked, looking at the crib where the baby slept peacefully. "No, Anthony is fine," Alison said. "But we want to ask you something personal. Have you ever had other children besides Charles?" Florence froze, her face visibly paling. "Why do you ask? Please answer." Brittany insisted gently. Florence sat down slowly in a chair, her hands trembling. "I had twin daughters a long time ago, when they were just babies." The sisters' hearts raced simultaneously. "What happened to them?" Alison asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I was 18, very young and alone," Florence began, tears already forming in her eyes. "Their father disappeared when he found out I was pregnant. I was living on the street. I had no money to eat, let alone raise 2 babies." "So you abandoned them," Brittany said, not as an accusation, but as a painful statement of fact. "In the John Denver Sanctuary," Florence confirmed, sobbing, "in the same place where you found my grandson 28 years later. I left them in a basket with a note explaining that I couldn't provide for them, but that I loved them more than anything in the world. The revelation hit the sisters like a lightning bolt. Alison had to hold onto the rail of Anthony's crib to keep from falling, while Brittany covered her face with her hands. "What was the date?" Alison asked in a choked voice. "March 15th, 1995. Florence replied immediately. "I've never forgotten. It was the most painful day of my life." It was the exact date on the documents from the orphanage where the sisters had been raised. There were no more doubts. "Mom?" Brittany whispered, the word sounding strange in her voice. Florence looked at the two women before her, truly seeing them for the first time. The familiar features, the eyes she recognized from the mirror, the way they moved in perfect sync. "My babies," she murmured, getting up unsteadily. "My girls." The reunion was a mixture of joy and pain that none of the three knew how to process. Florence hugged the daughters she had lost, but they remained tense, decades of abandonment not erasable by an explanation, no matter how understandable. "I looked for you," Florence said between sobs. "For years I looked, but the orphanage said you had been adopted and couldn't give me any information." "We were never adopted," Alison said, her voice filled with old hurt. "We grew up there until we were 18. We left with no family, no support, no nothing." The guilt on Florence's face was devastating. "I didn't know. I thought you would have a better life with a real family." Walter, who had arrived during the conversation, watched the scene in silence. The emotional complexity of the situation was beyond anything he could have imagined. Anthony wasn't just an abandoned child. He was the grandson of the woman who had abandoned her own twin daughters in the same place. And those daughters were the two young women who had dedicated themselves to caring for him. "Does this change anything?" Brittany asked, looking at Walter. "About Anthony, I mean." "It changes everything and it changes nothing," he replied after a long pause. "You are his blood aunts now, not just caregivers. You have legal rights you didn't have before." In the following weeks, as Anthony was finally discharged from the hospital, the family dynamic became even more complicated. Alison and Brittany struggled with conflicting feelings about Florence. Part of them understood the circumstances that had led to their abandonment, but another part carried the pain of a lifetime without a family. "She did the same thing with her grandson that she did with us," Brittany said bitterly during a late-night conversation in their apartment, where they now cared for Anthony in shifts. "It's not quite the same thing," Alison replied, holding the baby who had just finished feeding. "Marcia, Anthony's mother, was the one who abandoned him. Florence didn't even know he existed. But the pattern is the same. When life gets tough, it's easier to abandon than to fight." Walter, who had become a constant presence in their lives, listened to these conversations with growing concern. His own situation was also getting complicated. Catherine had sent separation papers through lawyers, demanding a division of assets and making it clear there was no going back for the marriage. "Maybe she's right," he said during a late-night visit, finding Alison awake feeding Anthony. "Maybe I'm being selfish, trying to create an instant family to fill the voids in my life." "You saved his life," Alison reminded him. "That's not selfishness." "But what about now? You are Anthony's blood relatives. You have more right to him than I do." Alison looked at the man who had become so much more than just a child's benefactor. In recent weeks, Walter had shown genuine paternal dedication, a kindness that went far beyond obligation or guilt. "Blood right doesn't automatically mean the ability to care," she said carefully. "Brittany and I can barely take care of ourselves financially. We work as nannies, earn little, live in a small apartment. How could we give Anthony everything he needs? And me?" Walter asked. "I'm a 52-year-old newly separated man with no experience with children. What kind of father would I be?" The kind who risked his own life to protect an unknown child, Allison answered without hesitation. It was in this conversation that an idea began to form in both their minds, a possibility that neither dared to verbalize yet, but which was becoming clearer with each passing day. The situation came to a head when Francis Carter called everyone for an official meeting about Anthony's future. It was time to make definitive decisions about the child's custody, and all interested parties needed to state their intentions. "We have a unique situation here," Francis said, consulting a pile of documents. A child with a discovered biological family, caregivers who turned out to be biological family as well, and a benefactor who has developed parental bonds. Legally, this is complex. Florence was the first to speak. "I waive any legal right to my grandson," she said in a firm voice. "I'm in no condition to raise him, and I know he is in better hands. I only ask to remain a part of his life as his grandmother." Allison and Brittany looked at each other before Allison spoke. "We want what's best for Anthony. If that means giving up our legal custody to someone who can give him better opportunities, we will do it." All eyes turned to Walter, who was holding Anthony on his lap. The baby, now 8 months old and visibly stronger after the surgery, was playing with the buttons on his shirt, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "I want to officially adopt him," Walter finally said, "but on one condition." Florence's decision to let others care for Anthony should have been a relief, but it brought a new series of bureaucratic complications that no one had anticipated. Francis Carter gathered everyone at the hospital the next morning with a worried expression. "The situation has become more complex," she explained, flipping through official documents. "With Florence recognized as the biological grandmother, she has legal rights over Anthony. If she wants to transfer custody, we need to follow specific family adoption protocols." "What does that mean in practice?" Walter asked, holding Anthony, who had just woken from his morning nap. "It means we need to determine who will have official custody, and that could take months of evaluations, interviews, and approvals." Allison felt a wave of panic. In recent weeks, she'd become so accustomed to the routine of caring for Anthony that the idea of losing him now seemed unthinkable. "But can he stay with us during this process?" "Temporarily, yes. But there's another problem," Francis continued. "The three of you, Walter, Allison, and Brittany, are not technically a legally recognized family unit. The system was designed for traditional families or single individuals, not for arrangements like this." Brittany sighed. "So what do you suggest?" "One of you would need to be the official legal guardian, while the others would be considered auxiliary caregivers." The silence that followed was heavy. It was a decision no one wanted to make, as it would mean that 2 of the 3 people who had become deeply attached to Anthony would be in a secondary legal position. It was Allison who finally spoke. "I'll do it. I'll apply for official custody." "Allison," Walter protested, "you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can't tie yourself down with this responsibility." "It's not tying myself down," she replied firmly. "It's choosing, and I choose Anthony." Brittany held her sister's hand. "If Allison applies for custody, I fully support her. We live together anyway, so in practice nothing changes. And I'll continue to help financially and participate in his upbringing," Walter added. "I'm not going to abandon him now." Florence, who had remained quiet during the discussion, finally spoke up. "Are you sure about this? It's a huge responsibility." "I'm more sure of this than anything in my life," Allison replied, taking Anthony from Walter's arms. The baby smiled at her, his small hands gripping her finger tightly. The bureaucratic process began immediately. Over the following weeks, social workers visited the sisters' apartment, evaluated their financial condition, and conducted extensive interviews about their motivations and ability to care for a child with special medical needs. It was during one of these evaluations that the first major twist occurred. The responsible social worker, Sandra Owens, asked a seemingly routine question that changed everything. "Alison, can you tell me about your own childhood? Where were you born? Who were your parents?" Brittany and I were abandoned when we were babies," Alison replied. "We grew up at the St. Vincent's home, here in Aspen." Sandra paused, consulting her notes. "Abandoned where exactly?" "In the same park where we found Anthony," Brittany said. "The John Denver Sanctuary. Our adoptive mother, Sister Constance, always told us we were found in a basket near the lake." Sandra was visibly intrigued. "What an interesting coincidence. Have you ever tried to find your biological families?" "We tried a few times over the years," Alison admitted, "but we never found any real clues. It's as if our biological mother just disappeared." "May I suggest something, since we're doing complete background checks for the adoption process? Why don't we include a genealogical search? We might be able to find information about your family." The sisters looked at each other. It was something they had wanted for years, but never had the resources or knowledge to do properly. "Would that be possible?" Brittany asked hopefully. "Of course. In fact, it might even help the adoption process. Families with a known history and stability are generally viewed more favorably." Meanwhile, Walter faced his own challenges. Catherine had called only once since she left, and the conversation had not been friendly. "I hear you're trying to officially adopt that child," she said, her voice cold over the phone. "It's a bit more complicated than that," Walter replied carefully. "I'm helping the sisters who will have official custody." "Walter, you're destroying our lives for a fantasy. Those two women are obviously taking advantage of you. Catherine, you don't even know Alison and Brittany. They are genuine people who love Anthony as much as I do." "Love?" She laughed bitterly. "You've known this child for less than 2 months. How can you talk about love?" Walter looked at Anthony, who was playing on the living room rug, a sight that had become a natural part of his daily life. "Sometimes love doesn't need time to grow. Sometimes it just happens." "And our marriage? Do the 15 years we spent together mean nothing?" The question hit Walter deeply. "It means a lot, but we both know we haven't been happy for years." This situation just made it clearer. The silence that followed lasted so long that Walter thought she had hung up. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice broken with emotion. "I can't compete with a child who represents everything I could never give you." "Catherine." "No, Walter, I think it's best we get lawyers. If you've chosen your new family, then I need to choose my own future." The call ended abruptly, leaving Walter with a mixture of sadness and relief. His marriage was officially over, but paradoxically, he felt lighter than he had in years. 2 weeks later, Sandra Owens returned with news that left everyone speechless. She arrived at the sisters' apartment on a Saturday morning, carrying a thick folder of documents. "I need you to sit down," she said, her expression serious but not grim. "The investigation into your origins has revealed something extraordinary." Alison held Anthony tighter, a strange premonition growing in her chest. "What did you discover?" "We found your original birth certificates," Sandra said, pulling documents from the folder. "You are Alison and Brittany Santos Smith. Your mother was Sylvia Santos Smith, 19 years old when you were born." "Was?" Brittany asked, noticing the past tense. "Sylvia passed away 3 years after you were abandoned. But here's the interesting part. She wasn't alone when you were born. There was an older woman who helped her during the pregnancy and delivery, a woman who worked for several prominent families in the city as a housekeeper." Sandra paused dramatically before revealing the information that would change everything. Her name was Florence Santos Smith Myers. She was your aunt. Florence is your aunt. The The silence that followed was total. Alison and Brittany looked at each other, slowly processing the impossible information. Florence, who was visiting Anthony at that moment, turned completely pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Sylvia was. Sylvia was my favorite niece. I lost contact with her when she got pregnant. The family didn't approve because she was so young and the children's father had disappeared." "My God," Brittany murmured. It means, Sandra said with a smile, "that Anthony is not just Florence's grandson. He's also your nephew. You are blood relatives." The revelation struck everyone like a bolt of lightning. Not only had Alison and Brittany found their biological family, but they discovered that Anthony was truly part of their family from the beginning. Fate had conspired in an astonishing way to bring 3 generations of the same family together in a moment of extreme need. But not all the news was good. Sandra continued with a more worried expression. "There's something else you need to know. The investigation also revealed that there are other living relatives who could claim rights to Anthony, and they have already been notified of the situation." "What condition?" asked Frances, her pen suspended over the official papers. Walter took a deep breath, looking at Alison and Brittany before continuing. "I want Alison and Brittany to be co-legal guardians with me. Not as nannies or employees, but as family. Anthony needs his aunts, and I need them too." The silence in the room was absolute. Frances frowned, clearly trying to process the legal implications of such an arrangement. "Mr. Nicholson," she said carefully, "this isn't exactly common. The law doesn't easily provide for this type of shared custody among unmarried people." "Then we'll get married," Walter said, turning to Alison. "Would you marry me for Anthony?" The question caught Alison completely off guard. She looked at the man who had become so important in her life in recent weeks, then at her sister, who was equally shocked, and finally at the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. That wouldn't be fair to any of us," she finally said. "A marriage of convenience never works." "Who said it would be just for convenience?" Walter asked softly, making Alison's heart race. Before she could answer, Brittany spoke up. "And me, in this arrangement, what happens to me?" The question revealed the emotional complexity of the situation. The twin sisters had never been separated, but now they faced a possibility that could change that forever. "You would live with us," Walter said immediately. "The house is big enough, and Anthony needs both of you." "Walter," Alison said, using his first name for the first time, "this is crazy. You barely know us. We barely know you. We can't make such an important decision based on just a few weeks." "Sometimes life doesn't give us time for considered decisions," he replied. "Sometimes we have to choose with our hearts and hope our heads catch up later." Frances interrupted the conversation. "Why don't we take some time to think? We can establish temporary custody while you decide on the details. Legally, it's the most prudent option." And so began a 3-month period of experimental cohabitation. Walter rented a spacious house on the outskirts of Aspen, and the sisters moved in with Anthony. It was a strange arrangement, an instant family formed by the most unlikely of circumstances. The first few days were uncomfortable. Walter, accustomed to living alone since his separation from Catherine, had to adapt to the joyful chaos of a house with a baby and 2 young women. Alison and Brittany, in turn, struggled with the feeling of living on a stranger's charity, even though he insisted they were welcome. But Anthony, with the natural adaptability of children, flourished in that environment. With 3 adults dedicated exclusively to his well-being, he developed rapidly, beginning to crawl and babble his first syllables. It was during one of these mornings, as they watched Anthony play in the garden, that Brittany made an observation that changed the dynamic among them all. "You know you're in love with him, don't you?" she said to Alison. Of course I'm in love with Anthony, Allison replied, pretending not to understand. I'm not talking about the baby, Brittany said with a knowing smile. I'm talking about Walter. Allison felt her face flush. That's ridiculous. He's an older man, newly separated, and we're here because of Anthony. And he's in love with you too, Brittany continued. Anyone with eyes can see how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. Indeed, in recent weeks, the relationship between Allison and Walter had evolved from shared caregivers to something deeper. Long conversations about Anthony's future turned into discussions about personal dreams, fears, and hopes. Small gestures of mutual care, him bringing her coffee during late-night vigils with the baby, her cooking special dishes she knew he liked, began to create an intimacy that went beyond shared responsibility. The situation became even more complicated when, during the second month of living together, something unexpected happened. Brittany collapsed. It started with nighttime coughs she tried to muffle so as not to wake Anthony. Then came fevers she attributed to simple colds. By the time the severity of the situation became clear, she was in the hospital with severe pneumonia that nearly progressed to sepsis. Why didn't you say you were feeling sick? Allison asked, holding her sister's hand in the hospital's ICU. Because you already had enough to worry about, Brittany murmured, her voice weak. I didn't want to be another burden. It was during this hospital stay that doctors discovered something Brittany had hidden for years. She suffered from cystic fibrosis, a genetic disease that compromised her lungs and digestive system. The diagnosis explained why she had always been more fragile than Allison, why she tired easily, why she avoided intense physical activities. How long have you known? Asked Walter, who had accompanied Allison to the hospital every night. Since I was 19, Brittany admitted. But the doctors said that with proper care, I could live a normal life. I didn't want Allison to know because she was already carrying too much weight taking care of me. Wait, Allison exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. Brittany, you're not a weight. You're my sister, my best friend, my family. But now you have a real family, Brittany said sadly. Walter, Anthony, you don't need me anymore. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Miles, who entered the room with a serious expression. I need to talk to you about Brittany's treatment. The next few days brought a flood of frightening medical information. Brittany's cystic fibrosis was in an advanced stage, requiring expensive and continuous treatments. The necessary medications cost thousands of dollars a month, and she would need daily respiratory physiotherapy for the rest of her life. How much time do I have? Brittany asked the doctor directly. With proper treatment, you can have decades of productive life, Dr. Miles replied. Without it, a few years, maybe less. Walter, who had remained silent, spoke up. She will have the best treatment available. Money is not an issue. I can't accept that, Brittany protested. You've already spent so much on Anthony. Brittany, Allison interrupted firmly. You are family. Family takes care of each other. But I'm not Walter's family, she insisted. Yes, you are, Walter said without hesitation. If I marry Allison, you become my sister-in-law, and even if we don't get married, you're already family to me. It was that night, in the hospital waiting room, that Allison finally made a decision she had been avoiding for weeks. Yes, she said to Walter. Yes. What? He asked, confused. Yes, I'll marry you. Not just for Anthony, not just for Brittany, but because I think I'm falling in love with you too. The strangest marriage proposal in history happened right there, in the hospital corridor, with Walter kneeling on the linoleum floor while Allison cried and laughed at the same time. But the happiness was short-lived. The next day, when Walter went to the bank to arrange financing for Brittany's treatments, he received devastating news about his company. During the months he had spent focused on Anthony and his new family, Nicholson Medical Equipment had undergone an IRS audit that revealed serious irregularities in the accounting books. They were not irregularities he had committed, but those of his minority partner, who had used the company for money laundering without Walter's knowledge. "How much time do I have before the company goes bankrupt?" he asked his accountant, Robert Smith. 3 months at most, Robert replied gravely. "And depending on the investigation, you could be held co-responsible for the irregularities, even if you didn't know about them." Walter looked out his office window, watching his carefully built life crumble. His company, a source of income and professional identity for over 20 years, was about to disappear. The money he had promised for Brittany's treatment might not exist in a few months. And worse, he could face criminal charges for crimes he hadn't committed. "Is there any way to save at least part of the company?" he asked. "Maybe. If you liquidate all your personal assets and use them to pay off the debts, but that would mean losing everything, the house, the cars, the savings. You'd be left with practically nothing." That night, Walter returned home where Alison was waiting for him with Anthony asleep in her arms and news that Brittany was improving and could be discharged in a few days. "How did it go at the bank?" she asked, immediately noticing his somber expression. And so, Walter found himself in the position of having to tell the woman he had just committed to that he might not be able to keep any of the promises he had made. Walter's confession about his financial situation left Alison silent for long minutes. She continued to rock Anthony, but her eyes were fixed on the floor, processing the devastating implications of what she had just heard. "How much time do we have?" she finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. 3 months, maybe 4 if I can negotiate with the creditors, Walter replied, sitting heavily on the sofa. "Alison, I understand if you want to call off the engagement. I can't ask you to marry a man who might be bankrupt in a few months." "Do you think I care about your money?" she asked, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Walter, I grew up in an orphanage. Brittany and I have lived our whole lives with little. Money isn't what makes me want to be with you. But Brittany needs expensive treatment. Anthony needs things I might not be able to provide anymore." "Then we'll find a way," Alison said firmly. "Together. Isn't that what families do? Face hardships together?" In the following days, while Brittany recovered in the hospital, a new dynamic took over the house. Walter began working 16-hour days trying to save what was left of his company, while Alison cared for Anthony and started looking for extra work to help with the mounting expenses. It was during one of these job searches that Alison made a discovery that would change everything again. She was in a nanny agency office when the owner, Mrs. Mendez, made a casual comment that put her on alert. "You said your name is Alison Smith?" the woman asked, consulting an old appointment book. "What a coincidence. A few years ago, a girl with the same name came here looking for work. But she said she had a twin sister and they needed to work together." "When was this?" Alison asked, her heart beginning to race. "Let me see. It was in 2019, March or April. I remember because she was desperate, said her sister was sick and they needed money urgently." Alison felt the world spin. In 2019, she and Brittany were working for the Carter family, a stable job they had held for 2 years. They had never looked for work in agencies at that time. "Do you remember anything else about this girl?" "Yes, I remember she said something strange. She said she was looking for her lost sisters, the daughters of Florence Smith. I didn't understand it at the time, but now that you're here..." Alison left the agency with her mind in turmoil. Was there someone else looking for them years before they found Florence? Someone who knew their origin and had tried to find them? When she arrived at the hospital to visit Brittany, she found her sister sitting up in bed, visibly better, but still fragile. "Brittany, I need to tell you something strange I discovered today," Allison said, recounting the conversation at the agency. Do you think it could be Marcia? Brittany asked. Anthony's mother? I don't know what to think, but I'm going to find out. In the following days, Allison transformed into an amateur detective, visiting employment agencies, family homes, anywhere someone might have information about a girl looking for the Smith sisters. It was in a small diner in the city center that she found her first real clue. "Oh, Marcia!" exclaimed Mrs. Nelson, the owner of the establishment. "Of course I remember her. She worked here for about 6 months, was a good employee. Always talked about the sisters she wanted to find." "When did she stop working here?" "It was strange," Mrs. Nelson said, thoughtful. "One day, she just didn't show up. Left her things here, never came back to get them. That was right after Anthony was born." "Did she have the baby with her?" "Sometimes. He was a beautiful, calm boy, but she was always nervous, always looking over her shoulder as if someone was following her." The revelation that Marcia had worked in the city until recently completely changed the perspective on Anthony's abandonment. It hadn't been a desperate mother who abandoned her child. It had been a woman who was running from something. "Do you have any idea what happened to her?" Allison asked. "I heard she got involved with dangerous people," Mrs. Nelson whispered, looking around as if she feared being overheard. "Drugs, maybe. Some say she owed money to people who don't forgive debts." Allison returned home with a heavy heart. Anthony's story was becoming more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. When she told Walter her discoveries, he became visibly worried. If Marcia was running from drug dealers when she abandoned Anthony, it could mean they're still looking for him, Walter said. Maybe they saw the news about his surgery in the local paper. "Do you think we're in danger?" Allison asked. "I don't know, but I think we should be cautious." Paranoia was setting in when, a week later, something confirmed everyone's worst fears. Walter was leaving work late at night when he noticed a car had been following him for the last few blocks. When he stopped at a traffic light, 2 men approached his window. "Mr. Nicholson?" one of them asked, a thin man with scars on his face. "Yes," Walter replied, trying to stay calm. "We need to talk about the boy," the man said. "Marcia's son." Walter felt his blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. The baby you're raising. Marcia owed us a considerable amount when she disappeared. Now that she's not here to pay, the debt passes to her son." "That's absurd," Walter protested. "A child can't be responsible for his mother's debts." "In our line of business he can," said the second man, larger and more intimidating. "But we're reasonable people. If you pay what she owed, $50,000, we'll consider the debt settled. And if we don't pay?" The man smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. "Then we'll have to resolve this another way." Walter arrived home trembling, not just with fear, but with anger. His life was already crumbling financially. And now he discovered that Anthony was in danger because of debts his biological mother had incurred. "We have to go to the police," Allison said when he told her what had happened. "And say what?" "That 2 men approached me on the street. They didn't make any direct threats. And if we go to the police, it might be worse for Anthony. So what do we do?" "I don't know," Walter admitted, picking up Anthony and hugging him as if he could protect him with paternal love alone. $50,000. Even if I still had the company running, I don't know if I could get that amount together quickly. It was that night that Brittany was discharged from the hospital and came home. When she learned of the situation, her reaction surprised everyone. "I have an idea," she said, her voice still weak but determined. "But you're not going to like it." "What idea?" Allison asked. "We can give Anthony back to the social services system. If he's in a foster family in another city, those men will never find him." The silence that followed was tense and painful. Technically, Brittany was right. It would be the safest way to protect Anthony, but emotionally, the idea of giving up the child they had learned to love as their own was unbearable. "No," Walter said firmly, "I'm not abandoning this boy. Not after everything we've been through together." "Me neither," Allison agreed. "There has to be another solution." "What?" Brittany asked. "Walter, you're going to lose the company in 2 months. How are you going to get $50,000 to pay off drug dealers? And then what? They could come back asking for more money." The question hung in the air, unanswered. For the first time since they had met, the trio found themselves facing a situation that seemed to have no viable solution. Anthony slept peacefully in his crib, oblivious to the fact that his simple existence had put the people who loved him most in mortal danger. "There's a third option," Walter finally said, his voice filled with a grim determination. "But it's risky." "What is it?" the sisters asked in unison. "Find Marcia. If she's still alive, maybe we can find out the truth about this debt and find a way to resolve this permanently." "And what if she's involved with even more dangerous people?" Allison asked. "Then at least we'll know what we're dealing with," Walter replied. "Because one thing is certain. I can't live in fear for the rest of my life, looking over my shoulder and wondering when these men will come back." The search for Marcia began in a methodical and desperate way. Walter hired Edward Carter, a retired state police investigator he had met through professional contacts. Edward was a discreet and efficient man with over 20 years of experience in complex cases. "It won't be easy to find her," Edward said during their first meeting in his small office in downtown Aspen. "If she's really running from dealers, she's probably changed her identity or is hiding somewhere remote." "But is it possible?" Allison asked, holding Anthony on her lap while the baby played with her bracelets. "Anything is possible. The question is how much time and money you're willing to invest." Walter sighed. "Edward, in 2 months, I might not have money to pay my own bills. Do what you can with the budget we have." While Edward worked behind the scenes, the life of the improvised family continued under constant tension. Walter began to vary his routes to work. Allison avoided leaving the house with Anthony unless necessary, and Brittany, still recovering, took on the responsibility of always being alert at home. It was during this tense period that an unexpected discovery brought new hope. Florence appeared at the house on a rainy Sunday afternoon, carrying an old cardboard box. "I found some of Charles's things that might help," she said, placing the box on the living room table. Photos, letters, and some contacts he had. Among the deceased son's belongings, they found photographs of Charles with a young, beautiful girl with brown hair and big eyes, clearly Marcia. But what caught their attention was a scribbled phone book with several numbers and names. Marcia had an older sister, Florence said, pointing to a name in the book. "Sonia. They didn't get along, but maybe she knows something." Walter picked up the phone and dialed the number. A female voice answered after several rings. "Hello? Sonia, my name is Walter Nicholson. I'm looking for your sister Marcia. It's about her son." The silence on the other end of the line was long and tense. "What son?" Sonia finally asked, but there was something in her voice that suggested she knew exactly what he was talking about. "Anthony. He was found abandoned a few months ago. We're taking care of him." "Marcia doesn't have a son," Sonia said quickly. "I think you have the wrong person. Sonia, please. The baby needed heart surgery. We've already done DNA tests. We know Marcia is the mother." Another long silence. When Sonia spoke again, her voice was filled with emotion. "Where are you? Can I come visit?" 3 hours later, Sonia Rivers was sitting in Walter's living room, watching Anthony with tears in her eyes. She was a woman of about 30, with features similar to Marcia's, but a harder expression, shaped by difficult experiences. "He looks just like Charles when he was a baby," she murmured. Marcia always said the boy took after his father. "Where is your sister?" Brittany asked directly. Sonia hesitated before answering. "Marcia is complicated. After Charles passed, she went into a downward spiral. She started using drugs to cope with the pain, and by the time Anthony was born, she was already involved with dangerous people. The men who came looking for us," Walter said, "they said she owed them $50,000. "It's true," Sonia confirmed. "Marcia borrowed money to buy drugs she was going to resell, but she ended up using most of the product and couldn't pay it back." "And now?" Allison asked. "Where is she?" Sonia looked at Anthony, who had fallen asleep in Walter's arms, before answering. "Marcia is in a rehab clinic in Denver. She checked herself in voluntarily 3 months ago. It was right after she abandoned Anthony." The revelation brought both relief and new worry. Marcia was alive and trying to recover, but it also meant she might eventually want her son back. "Does she know the boy is okay?" asked Florence, speaking for the first time since Sonia arrived. "No. She thinks Anthony was adopted by a family in another city. That's what I told her when she called from the clinic." "Why?" Walter asked. "Because knowing Marcia, if she knew her son was nearby, she would leave the clinic to get him, and she's not ready for that yet." Edward, who had arrived during the conversation, asked the question everyone was avoiding. "And what about the dealers? Do they know where Marcia is?" "I don't know," Sonia replied. "But if they find out, she's in danger, and so is Anthony." It was that night that Walter made the most difficult decision of his life. "We're going to visit Marcia at the clinic," he announced. "We have to resolve this situation once and for all." The trip to Denver was tense. Allison brought Anthony, despite Brittany's protests about safety. Sonia accompanied them, nervous about how her sister would react to the reunion. The Hope Clinic was located in a quiet residential area of the state capital. Marcia was waiting for them in a bright visiting room, and when she saw Anthony, she broke down in tears. She was surprisingly young, only 24, but looked like she had lived much longer. Her brown hair was cut short. She had gained a healthy amount of weight during her stay, and her eyes, though sad, were clear and alert. "My baby," she whispered, reaching out for Anthony. "He's grown so much." Anthony, who at 9 months already recognized familiar faces, was initially wary of Marcia, clinging to Allison. The reaction clearly hurt his biological mother. "He doesn't know me anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "It's natural," Allison said gently. "He was very young when he was abandoned." "I didn't want to abandon him," Marcia protested, looking at everyone in the room. "But they were looking for me. They said they would hurt the baby to force me to pay." "Who are they exactly?" Walter asked. "Diego Ramos and his crew. They control drug distribution in 3 cities in the region. I owed them and I had no way to pay." Edward took notes in his notebook. "Marcia, do you have any proof of the threats? Documents, messages, anything that could help the police? These people don't leave a trail," she said, "but I can give details of where they operate, how their operations work." "That would be dangerous for you," Sonia observed. "More dangerous than it already is?" Marcia asked. "They'll never leave me alone, and now they're threatening innocent people because of me." For the next 2 hours, Marcia told her full story, how she started using drugs after Charles's death, how she was manipulated by Diego into becoming a dealer, how the pregnancy had complicated everything, and finally, how she had made the desperate decision to abandon Anthony to protect him. "I watched you from a distance," she confessed to Allison and Walter. "At the hospital during the surgery, I saw how you cared for him, how you loved him. That's when I knew I had made the right decision." "You were there?" Allison asked, shocked. "In the hallway, pretending to visit another patient. I needed to make sure he was okay." The conversation was interrupted by a nurse who announced the end of visiting hours, but before they parted, Marcia made a proposal no one expected. "I want to testify against Diego," she said, her voice firm. "I want to tell the police everything, but in return, I need you to promise me one thing." "What?" Walter asked. "When I get out of here, cured and manage to rebuild my life, I want to be part of Anthony's life again, not as his main mother. You deserve that title. But I want him to know he has a biological mother who loves him and who made terrible mistakes, but who is fighting to redeem herself." Allison looked at Anthony, who had fallen asleep in her arms, then at Walter, who nodded slightly. "We promise," she said, "but first, you need to stay safe. If you're going to testify against these people, you'll need protection." "I know," Marcia replied. "It's a risk I'm willing to take. For Anthony, for you, and for all the other people Diego will continue to harm if no one stops him." On the drive back to Aspen, the silence in the car was heavy with the implications of what had been decided. They now had information that could lead to the arrest of the men who threatened them. But the price would be putting Marcia at risk and possibly triggering an escalation of violence that could affect them all. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Allison asked Walter. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I can't keep living in fear. And if we do nothing, other families could go through what we're going through." The return from Denver brought a sense of urgency none of them had experienced before. Edward worked through the night, making contacts with trusted police chiefs and preparing a plan for the operation to arrest Diego Ramos and his group. "We have to be very careful," he said during a meeting the next morning. "People like Diego have informants everywhere. If he finds out Marcia is going to testify, he might try to silence her before she gets to the courthouse." Walter looked out the window of his house, watching Allison play with Anthony in the garden. In the last few days, he had noticed how she struggled to maintain a normal appearance, but he saw the fear in her eyes every time an unfamiliar car passed by. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "If all goes well, 1 week. Chief Ferreira wants Marcia to go straight from the clinic to testify at the specialized precinct. After that, she'll enter the witness protection program." "And us?" asked Brittany, who, despite feeling better with the new medications, still had episodes of shortness of breath. "Will we need protection too?" "For a while, yes, until Diego and his group are arrested." That afternoon, as they organized the final details of the plan, Walter received a call that changed everything again. It was Robert Smith, his accountant, with urgent news about the company. "Walter, you need to come here now," Robert said, his voice tense. "The IRS has seized all the company's documents. And there's more. They found evidence that your partner was involved in money laundering for criminal groups." Walter's blood ran cold. "What kind of criminal groups?" "Drug trafficking, Walter. The same scheme that might be connected to Marcia's problems." The revelation was like a punch to the gut. His company, which he had built with so much work over the years, had been used as a front for criminal operations, and worse, this could connect him directly to the men who were threatening his family. "Robert, does this mean I could be arrested?" "Not if we can prove you didn't know anything. But Walter, if these groups find out you're cooperating with the police..." Walter didn't need Robert to finish the sentence. If Diego discovered the connection between Walter's company and the criminal operations, and knew that Walter was helping Marcia testify, the threats would become much more serious. When he returned home, he found Allison trying to give Anthony a bath while the baby threw a tantrum, splashing water everywhere. It was a normal domestic scene that contrasted sharply with the chaos forming around their lives. "How did it go at the company?" she asked, drying Anthony with a fluffy towel. Walter hesitated. There were already so many worries, so much uncertainty. Was it fair to add another layer of fear to that moment? complicated, he finally said, but we'll figure it out. Walter, Allison said, putting Anthony in his crib and turning to him, we need to be honest with each other. I can see in your face that there's something you're not telling me. He looked into her eyes, those same eyes that had shown so much courage the day they found Anthony in the park, and knew he couldn't hide the truth. My company may have been used for money laundering by the same group that's threatening us, he said. I didn't know, but this could make me an even bigger target. The silence that followed was broken only by Anthony's babbling as he happily played with a stuffed toy, oblivious to the gravity of the adult's conversation. What does this mean for us? Allison finally asked. It means I might have to turn myself in to the police as a witness too. And it means you and Anthony could be in even greater danger. Then we'll all go into the protection program, said Brittany, who had appeared at the bedroom door. Family stays together. Brittany, you're sick. You need constant medical treatment. The protection program might not be able to guarantee the care you need. Then we'll find a way, she said stubbornly. I'm not letting you face this alone. It was that night they received the call they had all been dreading. Walter answered the phone and immediately recognized the voice of the man who had approached him on the street weeks ago. Mr. Nicholson, it seems you've been asking questions about people you shouldn't, said Diego Ramos, his voice calm but laden with threat. That's not smart. I don't know what you're talking about, Walter replied, signaling for Allison to call Edward. Of course you do. Marcia, the clinic, talks with cops. You think we don't have eyes and ears everywhere? Walter felt fear take over his body. If Diego knew about the clinic visit and the police contacts, it meant his informants were more efficient than Edward had anticipated. What do you want? Walter asked. First, I want you to stop this stupid collaboration with the police. Second, I still want the $50,000 that Marcia owes. And third, Diego paused to give more weight to his next words. I want the boy. What? Anthony is Marcia's son. By right, he belongs to her, and since she's in no condition to raise him, I'll take on that responsibility. That's crazy, Walter protested. You have no legal right to him. Legal right? Diego laughed. Mr. Nicholson, it seems you still don't understand how things work around here. I don't need legal rights. I just need you to be smart enough to protect your family. Are you threatening me? I'm being clear about the consequences of your choices. You have 24 hours to make a decision. Either you stop this police nonsense and hand over the boy, or I'll handle this my way. The call ended, leaving Walter staring at the phone in horror. Allison was pale, having overheard part of the conversation. He wants Anthony, Walter said, his voice trembling with anger and fear. Over my dead body, Allison replied, going to the crib where Anthony slept peacefully. Edward arrived in 20 minutes, accompanied by 2 plainclothes agents. The house turned into a makeshift operations center with phones ringing, radios crackling, and maps spread over the kitchen table. The situation has changed, Edward said gravely. Diego is desperate. If he wants the child, it's because he has specific plans, probably to use Anthony as leverage against Marcia's testimony. No, what kind of leverage? Brittany asked. If he has the child, he can blackmail Marcia into changing her testimony or simply disappearing. It's a common strategy among criminals. So we have to act now, Walter said. We can't wait another 24 hours. I agree. I've already triggered the operation. At 6 in the morning, simultaneous teams will arrest Diego and his group at 3 different locations. You'll stay in a safe house until it's all over. And Marcia? Allison asked. She's already being moved to a secure location. She'll testify via video conference. The preparations to leave the house were surreal. In a matter of minutes, their lives were reduced to what fit in 2 backpacks, essential clothes, Brittany's medications, and a few of Anthony's toys. Where are we going? Allison asked, putting Anthony in his car seat. A farm 50 miles from here. A state police property used for witness protection. You'll stay there until it's safe to return. As they left the house at 2 in the morning, Walter looked back one last time. The house where they had formed an impromptu family, where Anthony had taken his first steps, where he and Alison had discovered they loved each other. All of it might be left behind forever. "It's going to be okay," Alison said, as if reading his thoughts. "The important thing is that we're all together." But as they drove down the dark road toward the safe house, none of them could predict that the police operation meant to solve all their problems was about to create complications none of them had imagined. At the farm, an unexpected discovery awaited them. Marcia had fled the clinic the night before, leaving only a note saying she could no longer put other people in danger because of her mistakes. The news of Marcia's escape reached the safe farm via an urgent call from Edward at 5 in the morning. Walter, who had barely slept, answered the phone with a bad feeling that was immediately confirmed. "She left the clinic at 2 in the morning, Edward said, his voice filled with frustration. The night shift nurse said Marcia seemed nervous since yesterday afternoon after she received a call. "Did Diego get to her?" Walter asked, trying to keep his voice down so as not to wake Alison and Brittany sleeping in the next room. "We don't know, but without her testimony, our operation is compromised. We have circumstantial evidence, but not enough for a solid conviction." Walter looked out the farmhouse window, watching the sun rise over the green fields of Colorado. In the last 24 hours, his life had become a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. "So, now what? We stay hidden here indefinitely?" "I'm trying to locate Marcia. She can't have gone far without money or transportation. In the meantime, you need to stay put." The farm was a simple but comfortable property with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a porch overlooking pastures where a few dairy cows grazed peacefully. The caretaker, Mr. John, was a 60-year-old man who had been part of the protection scheme for over a decade. "I've had families here before," he said as he prepared breakfast for everyone. "Good people who got into trouble for doing the right thing. You'll be safe here." Anthony, at 9 months old, was fascinated by the rural environment. He had never seen cows up close, and his joyful shrieks when the animals mooed brought moments of lightness to the tension that dominated the group. "At least someone's having fun," Brittany commented, watching the baby try to crawl after a farm cat. "How are you feeling?" Alison asked, noticing her sister was paler than usual. "Tired. The stress isn't doing my lungs any good," Brittany admitted, "but I'll hang in there." It was during lunch that they received a call that changed everything again. Walter's phone rang, displaying an unknown number. "Hello?" "Walter, it's me, Marcia." The young woman's voice was tense and frightened. "I need to talk to you." "Marcia, where are you? Everyone is looking for you." "I'm hiding in a hotel in Glenwood Springs. Walter, I know where Diego keeps evidence of all his operations, documents, financial records, everything." Walter's heart raced. "How do you know that?" "Because I worked for him longer than I said. It wasn't just selling drugs on the street. I helped move the money, forge documents. I know where he hides everything." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "Because I was scared. But now..." "Last night he called me at the clinic. He said if I didn't disappear and forget everything I knew, he would hurt Anthony." Alison, who was listening to the conversation on speakerphone, felt her blood run cold. "He threatened Anthony directly?" "Yes. He said he knew where you were hiding, that he had informants in the police. He said if I didn't disappear, you would never see the baby again." Walter and Alison looked at each other. If Diego really had informants in the police, the safe house might not be so safe after all. "Marcia, where is this evidence?" Walter asked. "In an abandoned house in the countryside near Aspen. Diego uses it as a warehouse. There's a safe buried in the basement with documents from over 5 years of operations. Can you take the police there?" I can, but only if I'm sure Anthony will be safe. Walter, you need to get out of there. If Diego has people inside the police, he'll find you. The call ended with the promise that Marcia would call back in 2 hours with more details, but paranoia had already set in at the farm. "She's right," Edward said when Walter called him. "We've had some information leaks in recent months. It's possible Diego has someone on our team. So what do we do? You leave the farm now. I'll arrange an alternative location without going through official bureaucracy. In the meantime, I'll check who had access to the information about the safe house." Within an hour, they were on the road again. This time, Edward personally drove them to a small family-run inn on the outskirts of Vale, nearly 100 miles from Aspen. "It's my sister-in-law's property," he explained. "No one in the police knows about this place. You'll be safe here." The Valley Inn was a simple and welcoming establishment with only 6 rooms and a family atmosphere. Mrs. Mary, the owner, received the group without asking questions, as if it were normal to host guests on the run from criminals. "My family has always helped those in need," she said simply, showing them 2 adjacent rooms on the 2nd floor. That night, as Anthony slept peacefully in the makeshift crib, Walter and Allison talked on the inn's porch about the uncertain future that awaited them. "Do you have any regrets?" Allison asked. "About getting involved in all of this?" Walter looked at her, the woman who had become his safe harbor in the midst of chaos, and shook his head. "Never, even if everything goes wrong, even if we lose everything. I don't regret a single second." "Me neither," she said, holding his hand. "Anthony brought us together, made us a family. It was worth every moment of fear. And what if we have to run forever, live in hiding, always looking over our shoulders? Then we'll do it together. As long as we have each other, we can face anything." The conversation was interrupted by Walter's phone. It was Marcia again, but this time her voice was filled with a determination it hadn't had before. "I've arranged it with a police chief from Denver," she said. "We're going to Diego's house tomorrow at 6 in the morning. He guarantees only trusted officers will be involved." "Marcia, that's too dangerous. What if it's a trap?" "Then at least I tried to do the right thing," she replied. "Walter, I can't live the rest of my life knowing my son is in danger because of my mistakes. It's time to end this." "And after, when Diego is arrested?" "After, I'll go back to the clinic, finish my treatment, and one day, when I'm truly ready, I'll ask to meet my son for real." The next morning, they followed the news on the inn's radio with their hearts in their throats. At 7 o'clock, the operation had begun. At 9, Edward called with updates. "They found the safe," he said, his voice filled with relief. "There were enough documents to arrest not only Diego, but an entire network of corruption that included police officers, local politicians, and businessmen. And Diego, arrested red-handed with 10 kilos of cocaine and $300,000 in cash. He's not getting out anytime soon." The news brought momentary relief, but Walter knew there were still pending issues. His company was still under investigation, his finances were devastated, and they didn't know if they could return home safely. "How long until we're sure it's safe to go back?" he asked. "A few days. We need to be sure we've caught the whole network. But Walter, there's something you need to know about your company." Edward's tone indicated the news wouldn't be good. "What is it?" "The investigation revealed that your partner was using the company for years. Unfortunately, the evidence suggests it will be impossible to separate your legitimate operations from the illegal ones. The company will have to be shut down permanently." The news was like the final blow in a sequence of disasters. Walter sat heavily in a chair on the porch, the weight of everything he had lost finally crashing down on him. "My company, my house, my reputation. I've lost everything," he murmured. "You haven't lost everything," said Allison, kneeling beside him. "You have a family that loves you, and together we will rebuild. With what money? With what job? I'm a ruined 52-year-old businessman. Then we'll start over, from scratch, like a normal family." It was at that moment, looking into the determined eyes of the woman he loved, hearing Anthony's laughter as he played with Brittany in the next room, that Walter realized a fundamental truth. He had lost a life that no longer satisfied him to gain a family that was worth any sacrifice. A week after Diego's arrest, the group was finally cleared to return to Aspen, but the city they returned to was different from the one they had left. News of the police operation had dominated the local papers, and Walter's name was mentioned in every report, sometimes as a victim, sometimes as a possible accomplice. "Local businessmen may have been used in money laundering scheme," Allison read aloud from a newspaper they had bought at a gas station. "Nicholson Medical Equipment, under federal investigation." "At least they're not calling me a criminal," Walter commented bitterly, driving on the road that led them back home. When they arrived at the house they had left in a hurry a week earlier, they found evidence that they hadn't been the only ones to visit. A few windows were open, drawers were overturned, and it was obvious someone had been looking for something specific. "Diego or the police?" Brittany asked, observing the mess in the living room. "Probably both," Walter replied, checking if anything important had been taken. In the following days, the reality of Walter's financial situation became completely clear. Lawyers, accountants, and tax authorities paraded through his house, each bringing worse news than the last. The company would be liquidated, all corporate assets would be confiscated, and he would have to pay substantial fines, even though he was considered a victim of the scheme. "Is there anything left?" Allison asked during a late-night conversation after the last lawyer had left. "The house is in my personal name, so for now it's still ours," Walter said. "But the savings, the investments, the company car, everything has been confiscated or frozen." "And Brittany's treatments?" Walter ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "That's where it gets complicated. The health insurance was corporate, with the company closed." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Brittany, who had improved considerably with the expensive medications, might have to stop her treatment. "I'll look for a job," Allison said immediately. "Both of us. Families always need nannies. Allison, you're already doing so much, I can't ask." "You're not asking. We're family. This is what families do." But finding work proved more difficult than they expected. The case's notoriety had reached all the wealthy families in town, and many were reluctant to hire nannies associated even indirectly with a criminal scandal. "People are scared," explained Mrs. Mendez from the nanny agency. "Not of you, but of the situation. Nobody wants to get involved with problems." It was during one of these frustrating weeks of job hunting that they received an unexpected visit. Marcia was at the door, visibly nervous but determined. She had gained some weight, her hair was longer and well kept, and she was carrying a small travel bag. "Can I come in?" she asked. "I'd like to talk to you." Anthony, now almost 11 months old and starting to take his first wobbly steps, was initially wary of his biological mother's presence, hiding behind Allison's legs. "He's grown so much," Marcia said, her voice filled with emotion. "Is he walking?" "Not officially yet," Allison replied, "but he's trying all the time." Marcia sat down carefully on the sofa, keeping her distance so as not to scare Anthony. "I finished the clinic's program," she said. 6 months clean. I got a job at a diner in Denver. I have a small apartment." "That's wonderful," Walter said sincerely. "How are you feeling?" "Better, stronger, but also realistic about my limitations." She paused, looking at Anthony playing with building blocks on the floor. "I came here to make a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" asked Brittany, who had come down to join the conversation. "I know you're going through financial difficulties. I read about the company's closure in the papers. Marcia took a deep breath before continuing. I want to help with Anthony's expenses, not a lot, because I don't earn much, but whatever I can. Marcia, you don't have to, Allison began. Yes, I do, she interrupted. He's my son. Even if you are his parents at heart, I have responsibilities, and more than that. She hesitated, as if the next words were difficult to say. I want to be part of his life. Not as his main mother, because you deserve that title, but as extended family. The proposal was unexpected and touching, but also complicated. How would they integrate Marcia into the family dynamic they had built? How would they explain to Anthony, when he grew up, that he had two mothers? We need to talk about this, Walter said diplomatically. I understand, but there's something else. Marcia looked directly at Walter. During the investigations, I found out that some of the money Diego laundered through your company came from operations I helped coordinate. Inadvertently, I contributed to destroying your financial life. The silence that followed was tense. Walter processed the information, trying to control the anger he felt rising in his chest. How much money? He finally asked. About $200,000 over 2 years. I kept detailed records. I had to for Diego. I handed everything over to the police as part of my plea deal. And how does that help? Because now you have concrete evidence that you were a victim of fraud. Your lawyer can use this to recover at least some of your frozen assets. Walter looked at Allison, who nodded slightly. It was a possibility they hadn't considered. Why are you doing this? Brittany asked. You could just start a new life and forget everything that happened here. Because I can't forget, Marcia replied, looking at Anthony, who had curiously approached her. You saved my son when I couldn't. You cared for him when I was destroying my life. You deserve all the help I can give. Over the following weeks, the family's dynamic changed in ways no one had anticipated. Marcia started visiting on weekends, initially for a few hours, then for entire days. Anthony gradually got used to her presence, starting to call her Ma, a childish approximation of Marcia that melted everyone's hearts. Is he confused? Allison asked one night after Marcia had returned to Denver. I don't know, Walter admitted, but he seems happy, and that's what matters. Meanwhile, the family's financial situation began to stabilize slowly. The evidence provided by Marcia allowed Walter's lawyer to recover a portion of the frozen assets, enough to maintain Brittany's treatment and the basic household expenses. We're not what we were before, Walter said during a family dinner that now included Marcia and Florence, who had become a constant presence as Anthony's grandmother. But maybe it's better. How so? Allison asked. Before, I had money, but I didn't have a real family. Now, I have little money, but I have something that's worth much more. It was during this conversation that Brittany made an announcement that surprised everyone. I have a proposal to make, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. What proposal? Allison asked. Marcia, you work at a diner, earn little, live in a small apartment. Walter, you're unemployed and need to rebuild your career. Allison, you and I are unemployed because no one wants to hire us. Where are you going with this? Walter asked. What if we started our own business, a family daycare? This house is big. It has a perfect yard for kids, and the four of us have experience with childcare. The idea was bold and risky, but it also made sense. They had the skills, the space, and the desperation needed to try something completely new. It would be a total fresh start, Walter said thoughtfully. Exactly, Brittany replied. For all of us. Marcia, who had remained quiet during the discussion, finally spoke up. I could move back to Aspen, help with the daycare, and be close to Anthony. You would do that? Allison asked. For him? For you? For a chance to rebuild my life honestly, I would do anything. And so, on an October night, an unconventional family decided to bet everything on an idea that could either succeed or lead them to total ruin. But for the first time in months, everyone felt something that had been lost in the weeks of fear and uncertainty: hope. The first few months of the family daycare were an emotional roller coaster that tested every limit of the newly formed family. Walter had invested the little money recovered from the company into necessary renovations to bring the house up to childcare regulations. Marcia had moved into a small nearby apartment and worked part-time at the daycare and part-time still at the diner to maintain an independent income. "We have 4 children enrolled," Alison announced during a family meeting one December morning. Little Laura, 6 months old, the twins Peter and Paul, 2 years old, and Isabella, 3. "And Anthony makes 5, Brittany added, watching the 1-year-old boy play happily with colorful blocks. "Can we handle this much energy?" The answer came in the following weeks. The once quiet and organized house transformed into a joyful chaos of laughter, tears, games, and discoveries. Walter discovered he had a natural patience with children he never knew he had, while Marcia blossomed in her role as a caregiver, finding an emotional stability in the routine with the children that she had lost years ago. "You're different," Alison commented one afternoon, watching Marcia tell stories to the children in the garden. "More light." "I feel useful," Marcia replied, adjusting Anthony on her lap. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm contributing to something positive." But not everything was easy. Brittany had developed a persistent cough that doctors attributed to stress and the dust from the house renovations. Her medications were working, but she needed more frequent rest, which put a strain on the others. "I'm not as useful as I'd like to be," she confessed to Alison during a sleepless night. "Don't say that. You're the soul of this family. Without you, none of this would have happened. But what if I get worse? What if my condition affects the daycare? Then we'll face it together, like we always have." The conversation was interrupted by a cry from the children's room. Anthony had woken up from a nightmare, something that had been happening more frequently in recent weeks. "Ma! Ma!" he cried, reaching his little arms out for Marcia, who ran to comfort him. "I'm here, my love," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Mommy Ma is here." Walter watched the scene from the doorway, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Seeing Marcia care for Anthony with so much love was touching, but it also awakened fears about the future. What if Marcia decided she wanted Anthony all to herself? What if the stability they had built was only temporary? His fears intensified when, 2 weeks later, they received an unexpected visit from the social worker responsible for Anthony's legal situation. "Mr. Nicholson, I need to talk to you about Anthony's custody situation," said Francis Carter, the same social worker who had been following the case from the beginning. "Is there a problem?" Alison asked, instinctively holding Anthony closer. "Not exactly a problem, but a legal complication. Marcia, now that you are established and have been clean for almost a year, you have the legal right to request full custody of your son." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Everyone looked at Marcia, who had turned visibly pale. I never said I wanted that. Abi," she murmured. "But it is your right," Francis continued. "The court may determine that as a recovered biological mother, you have priority over the child's custody." "And what if she doesn't want it?" Walter asked. "What if she's happy with the current arrangement?" "Even so, the law is clear. Unless there is a formal adoption or a legal waiver of maternal rights, Anthony's situation remains temporary." In the weeks that followed, the issue of legal custody hung over the family like a dark cloud. Marcia became increasingly distressed, torn between her love for Anthony and the recognition that Walter and Allison were the child's true parents. "I don't know what to do," she confessed during a private conversation with Walter. "I love my son, but you are his family. I am. I am just the person who brought him into the world." "You are more than that," Walter said gently. "You are part of our family, but the decision has to be yours." "And if I legally waive my rights, can I still be part of his life?" "Of course. You will always be his biological mother. That will never change." Marcia's decision came on a sunny January afternoon during Anthony's second birthday party. The house was filled with children from the daycare and their parents, who had gradually become a supportive community for the unconventional family. "I want to make an announcement," Marcia said, standing before all the guests. "Today is not just Anthony's birthday. It's also the day I make official something that has been true for a long time." She looked at Walter and Allison, who were sitting nearby with Anthony on their laps. "Walter and Allison are my son's true parents. They saved him when I couldn't, loved him when I was lost, and gave him a family when I only had problems to offer." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained firm. "Therefore, I signed the papers relinquishing my maternal rights this morning. Anthony will officially be the son of Walter and Allison." The silence that followed was broken by the spontaneous applause of the guests. Walter stood up, moved, and hugged Marcia. "You will always be family," he said. "This doesn't change anything between us." "Yes, it does," she replied, smiling through her tears. "Now I can just be Aunt Marcia without all the legal complications. I can love this boy without fear of hurting you." That night, after all the guests had gone and Anthony was sleeping peacefully in his room, Walter and Allison sat on the porch processing everything that had happened. "Can I make a confession?" Allison said. "Of course. I was terrified that Marcia would change her mind and take Anthony away." "Me too," Walter admitted. "But I think we underestimated her character. What she did today was the most generous gesture I have ever seen." "And now, is he officially our son?" "As soon as the adoption papers are finalized, yes. He will be Anthony Nicholson Smith." Allison laughed. "Smith for me and Brittany. Nicholson for you. He will carry all of our names, as it should be in a real family." 3 months later, Anthony's official birth certificate arrived in the mail. Walter Nicholson and Allison Smith Nicholson, they had married in a simple ceremony at the local church in February, were listed as the legal parents. "It's over," Allison said, holding the official document. "He's ours forever." "No," corrected Brittany, who had improved considerably with a new treatment they were able to afford through the daycare's profits. "We are his forever. There's a difference." The family daycare had grown to 8 regular children, and there was a waiting list for spots. What had started as a desperate solution to a financial crisis had turned into a thriving small business that served the local community. "Who would have thought that losing everything would lead me to find everything?" Walter commented one afternoon, watching Anthony play in the garden with other children under the watchful eyes of Marcia, Allison, and Brittany. But just as they thought they had found stability, life had another surprise in store for them. Florence appeared at the house one afternoon with a serious expression that immediately alerted everyone. "I need to tell you something I discovered about the family," she said, sitting down carefully in the living room. "What kind of thing?" Allison asked, her stomach tightening with a bad feeling. "About your father, about why I really abandoned you almost 30 years ago." The revelation Florence was about to make hung in the living room air, like an invisible threat. Allison and Brittany looked at each other, bracing for another painful truth about their past, while Walter held Anthony, the boy happily playing with a toy car. "Mom," Alison said, for the first time using the word she had avoided for months. What do you mean about our father? Florence took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she carefully arranged her words. Girls, I never told you the truth about why I abandoned you. I said I was too young, that I couldn't afford it, but there was something more. What? Brittany asked, her voice tense. Your father didn't disappear when he found out I was pregnant, Florence began, looking at her hands. He left because I told him to leave. Walter frowned. Why? Because I found out who he really was. Edmund Ramos wasn't just a charming young man I met at a party. He was a member of a family involved in criminal activities. The silence that followed was broken only by Anthony's cheerful babbling as he remained oblivious to the growing tension in the room. Criminal like what? Alison asked, her voice barely a whisper. Drug trafficking, mainly. The Ramos family had controlled operations in the region for decades. Florence paused, seeing the growing horror on her daughters' faces. When I found out I was pregnant and told Edmund, he was happy. He wanted to marry me, said he would stop his illegal activities. But you didn't believe him, Brittany said. I tried to believe. For a few months it seemed like he was really changing, but then I found out his family was planning to use our marriage as a front to expand their operations. Walter felt a chill in his stomach. A front how? A young family, a wife pregnant with twins, would be the perfect cover to move drugs between cities. They wanted me to pretend to be a desperate mother seeking medical treatment for premature babies, constantly traveling between hospitals. Oh my God, Alison murmured. When I confronted Edmund about it, he said he had no choice, that the family had decided and he had to obey. Tears began to stream down Florence's face. That's when I understood that my babies would never be safe as long as they were his daughters. So you abandoned us to protect us, Brittany said, understanding, and you told Edmund you had lost us at birth, that the babies were stillborn. Florence sobbed. He was devastated, but also relieved in a way. His family lost interest in me after that. The complexity of the revelation left everyone silent. Florence had sacrificed the chance to raise her daughters to protect them from a future as tools in criminal operations. And after? Walter asked. After I disappeared for a few years, moved cities several times. When I returned to Aspen, I learned that Edmund had died in an accident related to his family's activities. The Ramos family fragmented after that. Wait, Alison said, a terrible realization forming in her mind. Ramos. Diego Ramos. Florence nodded sadly. Diego was Edmund's nephew. When I found out Marcia was involved with him, I almost went crazy with fear. You knew about the connection? Asked Marcia, who had arrived from work and was listening to the conversation from the doorway. I suspected. The name wasn't a coincidence. And when I saw Diego for the first time when he was arrested, I recognized the family features. Florence looked at Anthony. My grandson was in danger from the same people who forced me to abandon my daughters. The cruel irony of the situation was not lost on anyone. Decades later, the same criminal family had threatened the lives of both Alison and Brittany and their great-nephew. But now Diego is in prison, Walter said. The Ramos family no longer has power. Don't they? Florence asked, her expression still worried. For all these months I've been discreetly asking questions. Diego had an older brother, Ronald Ramos. He took over the operations when Diego was arrested. And is that a problem for us? Alison asked, instinctively hugging Anthony closer. It could be. Ronald was always smarter than Diego, more cautious. If he finds out about the family connection, about the fact that you are Edmund's daughters. The sentence hung in the air, but everyone understood the implication. If Ronald discovered that Alison and Brittany were his cousins, and that they were raising the son of the woman who had helped bring down his brother, he might see it as a matter of family honor. What do we do? Brittany asked, her voice tense. For now, nothing, Florence replied. Ronald operates out of Denver now, far from here, and the family connection is old. He might not even know you exist. But do you think we should be worried? Walter insisted. I think we should be alert. The Ramos family has a long memory and a tendency to hold grudges. In the weeks that followed, the revelation about the family's criminal heritage created an underlying tension that everyone tried to ignore, but which was always present. Walter started varying his routes around town again, and Marcia avoided mentioning her past with Diego to anyone outside the family. Are we being paranoid? Allison asked one night, watching Walter check all the house windows before bed. Maybe, he admitted. But I'd rather be paranoid and wrong than relaxed and in danger. The daycare continued to thrive, but now there was an added layer of care in selecting the families they served. Walter had installed discreet security cameras and was always on the lookout for strange cars or people in the neighborhood. It was during one of these moments of surveillance that he noticed something that made him uneasy. A middle-aged man had passed by the street several times during the week, always at the same time, always looking at the house with obvious interest. Edward, Walter called the investigator who had become a close friend, I need you to check something for me. 2 hours later, Edward was at the house with news that confirmed everyone's worst fears. The man you saw is named Robert Mendez, he said, consulting his notes. He works for Ronald Ramos as, let's say, a private investigator. He knows about us, Allison asked. Apparently, yes. My sources say Ronald found out about the family connection a few weeks ago. He's investigating you to decide if you pose a threat. A threat? Marcia asked. We're an ordinary family taking care of children. What threat could we be? You have intimate knowledge of Diego's operations. Marcia testified against him. And now Ronald knows your family. Edward paused, choosing his words carefully. To someone like him, this could look like a conspiracy planned for decades. That's ridiculous, Brittany protested. To us, yes. To him, it could be a matter of family honor and business survival. Walter stood up and walked to the window, watching the quiet street where Anthony was playing in the garden with other children from the daycare. The peaceful life they had built was under threat again, but this time the danger came from a past they didn't even know existed. What are our options? He asked. You could leave town again, start over somewhere else, Edward suggested. Or you could face the situation head-on. How? Florence asked. Ronald is a businessman above all else. Maybe you can negotiate with him, make it clear that you don't pose a threat to his operations. And if he doesn't want to negotiate? Walter asked. Edward didn't answer immediately, but his expression said it all. Then we'll have to protect ourselves as best we can, Walter finally said, looking at his family, his wife. His sister-in-law, the recovering ex-addict who had become a sister, his brave mother-in-law, and the son of his heart, who had transformed all their lives. We're not running anymore, Allison said with determination. We've built a life here. We have a daycare, a community, a home. If Ronald Ramos wants trouble, he'll find a family willing to fight. That night, as Anthony slept peacefully, oblivious to the dangers surrounding them, the family gathered to plan how to protect everything they had built together. They didn't yet know that the true revelation about Florence's past was just beginning. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.